Hello everyone! As some of you know, one of my goals for this year is to create lighting classes on this channel. And to start out, it's a good idea to learn what is important when buying lights. My name is Amri, wolf.amri on Instagram, and today I will compare two different price speedlights from Godox and tell you what is important for your buying decision. First of all, why Godox? I recently had to replace all my lighting gear and my research led me to Godox because they are very good value for money and constantly come up with new, affordable and useful products to extend the usability of your gear. That is important when investing into a system that you'll probably stick with for a while. So I ended up getting 4 different sized flashes additionally to the Speedlight that I already had. After I bought them, I reached out to Godox to ask them whether they would be interested to partner up for my future lighting classes. And as a starter, they sent me this TT685II Speedlight that I will now compare to its bigger brother, the V1 that I already owned. While doing that, I will guide you through the most important features Speedlights have or should have. Let's start out with wireless triggering. Not because it's the most important function, but to explain my setup. Speedlights can of course be placed on camera without the need of a trigger, but if it supports off-camera triggering, you usually need a so-called transmitter. I will trigger both Speedlights with a Godox X Pro transmitter that will let me set most of the functions of the Speedlights remotely. A note in regard to transmitters. In 99% of the cases, they are proprietary for the manufacturer. So don't get a Godox trigger and expect them to trigger your Nikon, Canon or whatever Speedlights. That will not work. You need to get one from Canon or Nikon in this case, and they are at least twice as expensive. Usually you will get a high-end Godox Speedlight and the trigger for the price you'd have to pay for the trigger only from one of the camera manufacturers. And another big plus, Godox triggers will control their bigger lights too, so it's an all-in-one solution, which I really love when I like to combine Speedlights and dedicated flash. Next up when comparing Speedlights is power. The more powerful it is, the brighter it will obviously be and the further it will reach. You know that from flashlights. More powerful, further reach. Talking about reach. One measure of Speedlights is the so-called guide number. That is supposed to tell you how far subjects can be placed from the Speedlight to still get a proper exposure. The calculation is really simple. It's the distance in feet or meter multiplied with the f number you have set on your camera. Or if you transform that, the distance the flash will reach is the guide number divided by the f number. So if the flash has a guide number of 60 meters, it means that at f6 your subject could be 10 meters away and still get enough light for a proper exposure. Now don't go and look if you can set f6 on your camera, I just used that number for easier calculations. But for example for f4 it would be 60 meters divided by 4, which is 15 meters. Same is true if the guide number is given in feet. 200 feet divided by 4 is 50 feet. So the max distance flash to subject in order to get a decent exposure is 50 feet. But don't let those guide numbers fool you. To explain why, let me first introduce you to my Godox Speedlight comparison chart. I created that on a dedicated website to help you guys make the right buying decision, because Godox website doesn't make it particularly easy to compare their products. I will give you the link to my comparison page at the end of the video. I promise you'll love it, because if you click on one of the row titles, it will automatically get you to an explanation what this feature/function does. Okay, back to the guide number. Let's have a closer look at the chart. For the TT685II, the listed guide number is 60 meters or 197 feet. But for the V1, Godox doesn't list the guide number at all. Looks like a weird thing to do, but they have a point in doing so. How far the light of the flash or Speedlight reaches depends massively on how the light is bundled. Let me show you something. The TT685II lets you change the reflector inside here to zoom the light from 20mm all the way up to 200mm. Let's have a look at how that changes the light output. 20mm versus 200mm. You can clearly see that the center of the image gets much more light at 200mm. Now the V1 has a round flash head with the goal of a very even light distribution across the frame, particularly vertically, so up and down. It does have a zoom, but it only reaches from 28mm to 105mm, meaning it will bundle the light less and therefore has less reach than the cheaper TT685II. Does that mean it has less power? No, it doesn't. Let me do another experiment. First, I measure the light at 1 meter distance at the maximum zoom setting of either flash. I get a reading of f22 and 6/10 with the V1 and f32 and 4/10 with the TT685II. Now, what do these numbers mean? They tell me that in 1 meter distance I can set the aperture to f32 and 4/10 to get a perfect exposure. That means that the cheaper Speedlight is almost twice as bright at the maximum zoom setting. But is it twice as bright in general? To test that, let me put both Speedlights into a softbox that you would use to get a really nice and soft light. While this is a small softbox, it will eat away a lot of light because it tries to distribute it more evenly over a bigger area, just like the widest zoom setting did. But the effect on your image when using a softbox is still vastly different. Have a look at this self-portrait done with a softbox and this one done with a bare-bolt flash. I'll get to that in my lighting classes, so you might want to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. If we now measure the light output again, we get the almost same results for either of the two Speedlights. So the output is the same, just the spread is different. So we see guide number is a bit of a useless measure. And in order to not do the V1 injustice because of that, Godox doesn't list the guide number for the V1. Just like hardly any bigger flash would list the guide number. They rather list watt seconds instead, which I've listed here, and they both have the same. So, in our Speedlight comparison, 1 point for each. Both have the same light output, one has a better reach, the other one a better spread. Okay, in the previous section of our Speedlight comparison we talked about pure power, but at least equally important is how well that power is accessible. And this is where we get to recycle times. The recycle time is the time it takes for the flash to be ready to fire again after it was fired at full power. Let me just trigger both of them and measure the time with the help of slow motion video. The V1 is ready after 1.52 seconds and the TT685II takes 2.52 seconds. Why is that? The V1 uses lithium-ion batteries that have a higher voltage and can basically fill the capacitor in the flash faster than the lower voltage AA batteries in the TT685II. Godox recommends analog rechargeable batteries. In general, they get slower the lower the voltage in the envelopes will get, and that can quickly get you down to twice the recycle time of the lithium-ion battery. For the occasional Speedlight use, the TT685II still recycles pretty fast, compared to, for example, Canon. That takes even longer according to their specs. One thing I have to mention though, if you shoot many consecutive images with a lot of flash power, both Speedlights will get slower in time to prevent overheating issues. So, the battery is something that is quite important when dealing with Speedlights. At the moment, most manufacturers still only work with AA batteries. Godox offers both solutions, and since lithium-ion batteries aren't particularly cheap, that explains the price difference between our two contestants quite a bit. Since we are comparing Godox Speedlights here, the V in the name tells you that the light uses lithium-ion batteries, the TT series uses AA batteries. Another note on recycle times. That's a big plus for a much bigger flash head. They not only recycle much faster in general, but since they are much more powerful than Speedlights, you also don't need to fire them at full power to get the same light output than a Speedlight. If I set this beast here, an 80-1200 Pro, so low that it has the same light output as the Speedlight at full power, and trigger it at 10 frames per second, it will fire 7 times per second. That's roughly 10 times as fast as the already fast V1 Speedlight and 20 times as fast as the TT685II. Next up in a decent Speedlight comparison is user friendliness. I've had quite a few Speedlights from many manufacturers in the years, and I have learned the hard way that a good menu structure and dedicated buttons go a long way with how easy you can work with the flash. The thing is, if it's not easy, you won't use that particular function or the Speedlight in general, particularly if you're not a pro and don't touch it almost daily. Then you'll forget how it works from one shooting to the next. And a Speedlight you don't use is like having no Speedlight at all. Believe it or not, despite the vast difference in price, both of the ones in the test have the exact same menu structure and button setup. And it is not only intuitive, but also quick to access. The only thing that bugs me with both, I have to press a button, the plus/minus button here, to be able to change the power rather than rotate the dial only, like you would do to change your shutter speed or aperture on your camera. That is something I'd request from Godox for a firmware update. Either way, user friendliness matters a lot, particularly for non-professional users. In my Godox Speedlight comparison chart, I have listed user friendliness up on top in the main features. The next point in our comparison, does the Speedlight have an auto function or is it manual only? Speedlights with an auto function are connected with the camera's electronics to measure the flashlight that is bounced by your subject through the lens into the camera. That's where the auto function gets its name, TTL standing for through the lens. While TTL can work really well, it still needs some attention because obviously if your subject is small in the frame and stands in a darker environment, it will bounce less light back into the camera than it would if it was bigger in your frame. So it's basically like the semi-auto functions aperture priority or shutter priority in your camera. They do work, but they are not completely foolproof. However, it is easy to correct the amount of light the camera thinks is enough by adding or reducing the flash power in TTL. All you have to do is press the before mentioned plus/minus button and rotate the dial. That makes TTL not only a good start for beginners, but also particularly helps, for example, at events where the light changes so fast that you will miss the one or the other shot if you constantly have to change and test the settings on a manual only Speedlight. Both of our test subjects support TTL, but neither all of the ones in the Godox lineup do, nor do all others. So have a close look before you buy. Just a side note, when thinking about buying, in my chart, I will give you the link soon, I will have some referral links to Amazon. If you'd like me to keep up the good work, please use them. Creating stuff like that costs money, and you help create good, unbiased content if you use referral links from me and other trustworthy YouTubers. The next, very important feature for my Speedlight comparison is high-speed sync. Sounds like a super advanced, sophisticated thing, but is very useful if you want to use your flash outdoors for sports and portraits. In a nutshell, it will let you use your Speedlight at faster shutter speeds, which is important if you want to take pictures outdoors with a wide open aperture or freeze motion. If your Speedlight doesn't support that, you will get an image like that, where your shutter curtain is basically casting a shadow caused by your Speedlight onto the camera sensor. I admit I faked that because I didn't have an image at hand, but trust me, this is about what it looks like. How that really works is a bit more complicated, but for an easy to understand explanation video, here is your last chance to subscribe to my channel. For me, HSS is a must-have in a Speedlight. Both the Godox V1 and the TT685II support HSS. So, these are the main points that you need to look out for when comparing Speedlights for a buying decision. There are more features that are not as important. You will find them in my Godox Speedlight comparison chart at, and here is the promised link, godox-comparison.com. As you can see and will see in the chart, both devices in our test are actually pretty similar, making the TT685II big value for money. The reasons why the V1 costs almost twice as much is the battery and the round head that is rather unique and comes with some advantages and disadvantages that I may address in a later video. Let me know if you're interested. If you're not interested in a round head, there is a version available without it that is lower in price, the V860 Mark III. And of course, it can also be found in the comparison chart. See you there!